Well, Jim Harbaugh is officially suspended for the first three games, a self imposed suspension. And I don't even really want to talk about the suspension too much, but I think it signals something bigger for college football, something we've been alluding to with the conference realignments going on and things of that nature. I think this signals some big changes coming in college football. So let's talk about the suspension first. Jim Harbaugh, self imposed suspension because of some NCAA things, all based on COVID. There were some things during that year. He might have violated some rules, maybe didn't disclose what he was supposed to disclose to the NCAA. And so Michigan and Jim Harbaugh have decided that they're going to suspend themselves for 3 games. Jim Harbaugh being suspended for 3 games. This really, I don't think, means much for Michigan. They return an incredible roster, probably really the best roster in college football this season. And if you look at their schedule here, he's going to miss the game against East Carolina, the game against UNLV, and the game against Bowling Green. This is what's happening right now, and this is why I actually think conference realignment is going to be helpful. Michigan might not be able to get away with just scheduling random schools here at the beginning of the season because there's going to be so many great teams in their conference. But for this season, USC, Oregon, UCLA, Washington, they haven't moved over yet. So they get to play East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green. Should all be very easy wins for them. They're going to be outmatched facing a Michigan team that is just loaded this year. Very solid Michigan team. So I actually don't think this is going to affect Michigan's season too much. Then they get Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota. Plenty of time to get their stride and get back into the rhythm with Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines. Really, their schedule, if I'm looking at it, looks pretty easy. Obviously, college football, anything can happen, and there's definitely some upset alerts in here. I think Nebraska might be an interesting team, Minnesota, but really, realistically, they're not worried about anything until Michigan State, and they're really only worried about Michigan State because it's a rivalry game. Should handle Purdue. Then you got Penn State, Maryland. Look at that as a trap game into Ohio State. They really have 2 teams. They're facing 2 ranked teams all season. So not too worried about the first 3 games of the season having Jim Harbaugh out. But what I think is interesting, and Joel Klatt today on Colin's show talked about the ineptitude of the NCAA and how he thinks it might be kind of the end of the NCAA being in charge. And it's really an interesting point because the NCAA doesn't have a lot of power, especially in college football. You can look throughout the years, and they've done some weird things with enforcing rules, not enforcing rules. They should have been ready for NIL. They weren't. They should be able to enforce their rules, but they weren't. And they aren't. They should have a framework in place for the transfer portal, but they don't. They've dropped the ball multiple times, and Klatt thinks this is the end of the NCAA potentially, and who knows what the new governing body would look like. I think one of 2 things is going to happen. One, the NCAA finally puts on its big boy pants and says, you know what? We're taking over. We're actually going to be a governing body like we're supposed to. Blow up all these conferences. We're taking it over. We're going to divide the teams the way we want to, the way we think it's logical. We'll work with the conferences, to keep some money coming in. But 2 is what Joel Klatt was promoting, and his opinion. These conferences are just going to say, we don't need the NCAA. The conferences already do everything themselves. The playoff committee, that's a conferences thing. That's the athletic directors. It's not the NCAA that sets that up. They already obviously decide who's in what conferences. And they have so many teams and so much power now. It really could be, like I said, four conferences. Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC. Boom. They grab all the best teams. Maybe there's some sort of promotion demotion kind of setup similar to how they have in soccer. I don't know. They could do it a lot of different ways, but I think maybe they'll just take it over and say, screw you, NCAA. We're going to make our own rules. Because there's so many coaches that are so fed up with this stuff. Every coach is tampering and complaining about tampering in the transfer portal, right? It's getting outrageous. You got Nick Saban whining, but then he's doing the same stuff, right? Everybody is whining about NIL and how much can we promise and what can we promise as far as money. Can you offer people money to come transfer? How does that work? Recruiting. All of this has gotten a little out of hand. It's kind of the Wild West, which is fun. It makes for some great drama, don't get me wrong. But that being said, I think the conferences are going to say, you know what? We've waited too long on the NCAA to step in and do stuff. We've got all the money. We've got all the TV deals, right? There isn't an NCAA network. It's a Big 10 network, an SEC network, Pac-12 network, which I don't know what that is anymore. But these networks, ESPN, Fox, they're making deals with conferences. They're not making deals with the NCAA. The bowls control a lot of what happens with the playoffs, right? The only reason we could go to a 12-team playoff next year is because we finally got the Rose Bowl on board. And all of that, I think, sets us up for kind of the end of football in the structure that we see as far as the governing bodies is concerned. Whether that is, like I said, maybe the NCAA just puts on the big boy pants and says, hey, we're taking over, and blows it all up. I don't think that can happen because it's probably too much money. And the NCAA itself isn't going to pay off all these contracts with the conferences. So the conferences are probably going to take over and say, we don't need the NCAA. We'll make our own governing body, similar to how they have a playoff committee. We're just going to add an extra governing body that's the rules committee. And that rules committee is going to oversee all these infractions and implementing all of this stuff. We're going to do it in a logical way. We're going to be prepared for this. It's really a tragedy in college sports that the NIL, we knew the NIL was coming. It was just a matter of time. It was too many people, too many legal battles going on. Eventually it was going to happen. NCAA was not prepared for it. NCAA implements these things like transfer portal and all this stuff happens. And yet, they weren't prepared. There's not good guidelines. There's not good rules. I mean, we're sitting in here in a situation where Jim Harbaugh's literally just self-imposing some restrictions on himself. Because, something was probably wrong, but we can't work it out with the NCAA. So we're just going to self-impose, and that's what we're going to do. Who cares? It's a slap on the wrist. If he did anything egregious, and if he didn't do anything egregious, it's just another situation where we're sitting here going, I don't know what the rules are. I don't know what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. It's ridiculous. So I think Jim Harbaugh, this is just another kind of straw put on that camel's back. And one of these, it's eventually going to break. I've already mentioned multiple times with the whole conference realignment, the playoff is going to have to change. They can't do 6 conference champion automatic bids if the Pac-12 doesn't exist. You just can't. You're going to have a lot of conferences very mad. So they're going to change that. The NCAA doesn't have control over this anyways. I think we are on the back half of this transition. Things will start settling in the next couple of years. And I think I could see either the NCAA is just going to completely collapse or it's going to be remade in a new structure. I think new structure is probably most likely. You need some sort of governing body that can make these decisions, hand out these punishments and these penalties. You've got players like a Reggie Bush, took money in college. Now players can make money in college, and that's fine. He lost his Heisman. Now players are all making money. Johnny Manziel admits to taking tons of money. He didn't have to give up his Heisman. How does this work, right? How? How does this work? NCAA, you got to make some calls here. They aren't. I think the conferences are just going to take over. I'm on the Joel Klatt train with that. I think he made a very good point today, bringing that concept up. I had always considered it more that the NCAA would come in and say, all right, conferences, you guys are getting out of hand. We're going to step up. But he's right. The power dynamic is not good for the NCAA to be able to do that. They don't have the money to buy out the contracts, and they don't really have the teams or the power to negotiate and pull them out of conferences. So the conferences are probably just going to push the NCAA out. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Today was a little bit of a quicker video, but thought this was very interesting. Jim Harbaugh suspended, a self-imposed suspension for the first 3 games. I don't think it really has much of an effect on their season, but who knows? Maybe there's an upset alert. They're not quite ready for game 1. We'll see. They've got plenty of experienced players. They're bringing a lot of people back from last year, and last year they were really good. So I think this year they're going to be prepared to have a very solid season. Will be exciting to watch. It is the last year of the 4-team playoffs, so that, here we go. We're getting ready for college football. It starts this Saturday. We got games. So excited. Cannot wait to watch. We'll definitely be talking a lot of college football next week as we get prepared for truly week 1 and review a couple of games maybe from week 0. So make sure you're subscribed, share this with a friend, and we'll see you next time.